Welcome to the Lead with Levity podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Heather Walker, and I just want to thank you for joining me today. I really do appreciate your time and support. Over the last few months, it's been an incredible journey, just connecting with all of these different leaders, discussing topics that are so important to the workplace, that are so important to leadership and growing as a person so that you can be there for your organization, for other people, to ensure that your company, your team, your workplace is thriving. So I just want to take a moment to say thank you. If you haven't subscribed yet, what are you doing? Go ahead and hit that button, subscribe so that you can get notifications, because guess what? This podcast does not come out every single day and you are a busy person. So go ahead and subscribe so that you can get updates and you can find out when new things come out. And I promise it will be unobtrusive. And if you haven't already, go ahead and check out our Facebook page or our LinkedIn page. Let me know what you would like to explore and learn a little bit more about in 2020. I'm looking at the 2020 lineup and it is looking exciting so far. But I want to make sure that it speaks to you as well as me. So please let me know. Let me know what speaks to you, share a comment, connect with me informally to let me know what do you want to hear a little bit more about. Whether it's play, culture, do you want more culture stuff, marketing, storytelling? Do you want to know about conflict resolution, inclusion, diversity, leadership development, tools, technology? What interests you? What challenges are you facing? I really want to know. I want to hear all about it so that this podcast can be something that enriches this whole community. So connect with me on Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever suits your fancy. Share a comment and some suggestions. Now, our guest for today, my guest for today, I like to refer to myself as if I am a lot of different people running around. Is Dr. Donna Hicks. She is an associate at the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs at Harvard University. There she serves as the deputy director of the program on international conflict analysis and resolution. And she is doing a lot of work there, y'all, to help resolve international conflict. We're talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We're talking about a 10-year project in Sri Lanka that she's been working on. She's also helping out with the conflicts in Northern Ireland and Colombia, and she conducted several U.S.-Cuba dialogues. She is currently serving as the vice president of Arapakis, an Italian non-governmental organization that's based in Rome. And there they're working on a dignity restoration project in Syria and Libya. And I know I'm throwing a lot of countries at you. I am just trying to keep up. I hope you're keeping up. She's also a consultant to the British broadcasting company, BBC, where she co-facilitated encounters between victims and perpetrators of the Northern Irish conflict with Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Now, these encounters were made into 3 television programs. You can look it up on BBC World. It's called Facing the Truth. Now, Dr. Hicks has taught several courses in conflict resolution at Harvard, Clark, and Columbia universities, and she conducts training as well as educational seminars in the U.S. and abroad on the role that dignity plays in healing and reconciling relationships in conflict, as well as dignity leadership training. So she consults to corporations, schools, churches, and non-governmental organizations. So you name it, she's there to do the work, to do what needs to be done to restore relationships. She's also the author to a couple of books, Dignity, its essential role in resolving conflict, as well as leading with dignity, how to create a culture that brings out the best in people. So I'm really looking forward to having a conversation with her today about what is it that we need to know about dignity? How do we actually honor it? What do we do, if we violate it? What do you need to do to restore that relationship? And how do we create a culture where dignity is the norm and not the exception? And it's not something that we just bring out of our toolbox or the closet when we hurt someone. So I'm looking forward to speaking with Dr. Hicks today and sharing her story as well as her tips with you. So stick around. Let's listen to a couple of highlights and then we'll get into the show.
It's time for a sneak peek.
And so fast forward, long story short, wrote this book called Dignity, Its Essential Role in Resolving Conflict, and ended up coming up with my own ideas about what dignity is. I came up with these, what I call the 10 elements of dignity and so on, and made it practical. I made it concrete, basically operationalized it so I could use it in these sessions with people. And when the book came out, Heather, what shocked me was it wasn't just my international conflict community that got interested in it. I got calls from the corporate world, from healthcare, from education. People said to me, I think you nailed our workplace problems. I think you nailed what's going on in the workplace with people, but they don't have any language to talk about what they've experienced. So hence, that's it, Heather. That's the backstory.
That's quite a backstory.
And now, on with the show.
I'm Dr. Heather Walker, and this is Lead with Levity. I help leaders create awesome work environments where communication is light, enjoyable, and uplifting. I shed light on the power of levity at work. Imagine just how much you can get done in that kind of environment. Come explore with me. Welcome back to the Lead with Levity podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Heather Walker, and I'm so excited to share today's guest with you, Dr. Donna Hicks. She's taught several courses in conflict resolution at Harvard, Clark, and Columbia universities. She conducts trainings, educational seminars in the U.S. as well as abroad on the role that dignity plays in healing and reconciling relationships, as well as dignity leadership training. So I think that this topic fits really, really well within our space, within our scope. And Donna, I want to welcome you to the show.
Oh, thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit about what interested you in studying dignity? How did you get into this topic?
Well, for the last 25 years, I've been doing work as an international conflict resolution professional and had convened dialogues with parties in conflict all over the world. So started out in the Middle East with Israelis and Palestinians, and then developed a project in Sri Lanka for 10 years, and at the same time was working in Colombia on that conflict between the rebels and the government. And several others, actually. And one of the things that I discovered as a practitioner was, being there sitting at those tables with people who were, had opted to kill one another. What I realized was that there were two conversations, actually, that were taking place at those tables. One was about all the political issues that we were trying to get them to compromise on and try to, move forward toward an agreement. But the other conversation, in my mind, was equally as interesting and important because this conversation had no words. It was a conversation that was taking place under the table instead of at the top of the table where all the political issues were being discussed. That conversation that was flowing under the table was like an emotional tsunami. There was so much, feeling that was in the room so much anger, so much resentment, so much feelings of injustice, all of that. And yet, Heather, we weren't talking about that. And so, because I'm a psychologist, I sat back and I'm observing all these, outbursts and this, this kind of emotional upheaval that was, and by the way, this was everywhere. This wasn't just in the Middle East or Sri Lanka. This was every session that I convened. And so I'm thinking, my gosh, what's going on here? How can I get the people to talk about that conversation that's going under the table, that emotional conversation, instead of the politics? Because I thought, first, we better handle this emotional, this crazy emotional, what I always call it, a tsunami. And so what I did was, one day, foolishly, now in retrospect, I looked at them and I said, hey guys, I said, we're having a really hard time here emotionally. Can we talk about the emotions that are, flying around here, interrupting our, the good work that we've been trying to achieve? And they looked at me and they said, emotions? Are you kidding me? This isn't about emotions. This is about hardcore political issues, and we are going to sit here until we get the politics right. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, okay, big mistake using the word emotions with high-powered negotiators.
Right.
Big mistake. So then I thought, okay, I went back and I said, they're traumatized. That's what this is about. They're just traumatized. And so I studied the trauma literature for about 6 months. And one day, said to the one group that I was convening, again, the same emotional hurricane was running through. And I say, look, people, I know you've been traumatized by this conflict, and let's have a conversation about that before we move forward with these political issues. All right. You want to guess what the response was?
A lot of machismo. What do you mean? Trauma.
Well, that would have been easier, but they said trauma. We're not traumatized. This is about politics. Oh my gosh. So they kept going back to this notion that this is all about the politics. And you know what? I wasn't convinced, Heather. And because I said to myself, if I were to put words to that conversation, it would sound, that unspoken conversation, it would sound what they would have wanted to say. They would have wanted to say, how dare you treat us this way? Don't you see we're human beings? Can't you see we're suffering? And you're doing nothing about it? So I realized at one point that this is about their dignity. This is about being treated as if they, weren't even human, that they were, that their suffering didn't matter. And so once I got that word, Heather, it opened doors like you wouldn't believe. So the next time I convened a group, I asked them, I said, look, even before we started with the politics, I said, look, I've been doing these dialogues all over the world for, a decade or more. And I have to tell you, I have a feeling that one of the missing links in our understanding of conflict is our issues related to dignity. And I said, if you don't mind, I'd really like to address this deeper human issue of dignity before we move forward into talking about the political issues that divide you. And I said, would you all be interested, would anybody be interested in talking about these unaddressed dignity violations that you undoubtedly have been suffering from? Well, again, that word dignity opened up the conversation. Everybody's hand went up, Heather. Everybody wanted to talk about their dignity violations. And it wasn't just their own personal dignity violations. It was the dignity violations that their ancestors suffered from.
Yeah.
So they had these narratives. They had these stories about what happened, about what it was like growing up, feeling like, they were treated as if they didn't matter. And it was just one of the most powerful moments in my, not to mention my career, but I would say in my life, because that word ended up having magic, associated with it. It could do incredible things. If it could open the dialogue the way I, was hoping for, the way it did, then I said, okay, now this, leads me to my, my second, the second piece to this. And that is that I realized that I had to do some research on this issue of dignity. And so I launched into it. and found, the philosophers were going back and forth about dignity and what it means and how to define it, all these analytical, questions.
Right.
But Heather, I was looking for, how do we use this issue of dignity to heal people's wounds in these conflicts? And so once, of course, I didn't find anything. Heather. So I took me 7 years. I researched this, and I went through all these crazy different literature reviews, and ended up realizing I couldn't find anything practical about how to use dignity to address these, concerns that I was seeing in every single conflict that I was involved in. And so fast forward, long story short, wrote this book called Dignity, Its Essential Role in Resolving Conflict, and ended up coming up with my own ideas about what dignity is. I came up with these, what I call the 10 elements of dignity, and so on, and made it practical. I made it concrete, basically operationalized it so I could use it in these sessions with people. And when the book came out, Heather, what shocked me was it wasn't just my international conflict community that got interested in it. I got calls from the corporate world, from healthcare, from education. People said to me, I think you nailed our workplace problems. I think you nailed what's going on in the workplace with people, but they don't have any language to talk about what they've experienced. So hence, that's it, Heather. That's the backstory.
That's quite a backstory. And, I think it's really important, because it's hard to think rationally and come together to solve problems if you're emotionally charged. Your whole view narrows when you're in that space.
Well, I call it's so true, Heather. I call it, your cognitive view shrinks down to a straw.
Right.
And it's like, look at, because the emotional stuff, the old brain has a mind of its own, and it doesn't like perspective taking. It doesn't care about empathy. It doesn't care about learning about what the experiences of others are. That cognitive constriction that you so perfectly pointed to is the reason why I thought we got to get this conversation about dignity first before we get into the problem solving, like you said, the rational mode. So you're spot on with that.
Yeah. This is so inappropriate, but when you were talking about the old brain, it got me thinking about, and you said, oh, the old brain doesn't care about this and that. I'm thinking honey badger. Honey badger doesn't care. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of honey badger.
I am not.
Okay.
No, but
you'll have to look it up after this. I try to keep my podcast clean. But it's a fun concept of this honey badger who doesn't care, doesn't give an F, and that reminds me of the old brain. When you talk about how the old brain doesn't care, the old brain is just looking to survive, and whatever threatens that, it's ready to act, and it or not act, depending on
pounce. Yeah.
Right. So you operationalize dignity, which is so impressive. What are the different elements of dignity?
Well, what I did, Heather, was I interviewed people from all over the world. I've been crossing all over the place, from Asia to Africa to North America, South America, Middle East. And I would ask people to tell me what it would feel like to them if they had their dignity honored. And of course, the interesting thing about it was they told me more negative stories about what happened to them when their dignity wasn't honored. And, of course, the flip side of that is what it feels like to have it honored. But anyway, I came up with these 10 elements. I don't know why 10 appeared, but it was 10. And first of all, people all over the world had a very similar response to that question. And it didn't matter whether it was Asia or Africa or here or somewhere in Europe. It seemed to be there was a universal, what can I call it, reaction to having their dignity violated, and what they wanted. The context may have differed a little bit, but it was the feelings were all the same. And they were like this. First of all, everybody wanted their identity accepted, no matter who they were. So the first one is identity. The second one is recognition. Everybody wants recognition. If they do a job well, if they do something that's wonderful, people are just looking for someone to say, hey, nice job. Or praise for doing something that is praiseworthy. The other one is acknowledgement. And, one of the things that I had the good fortune of doing in my career was working with Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And we were working in Northern Ireland together once. And, I said to him, Archbishop, I said, look, if you've helped resolve conflicts all over the world, what do you think the single most important ingredient is for people who want to put the past to rest, let go, and just move forward into their new lives? And he said, well, Donna, the truth is that when people have been roughed up, he says, that's a quote, when people have been roughed up, they need acknowledgement of the suffering that they've endured. And that gave me pause. And I just stopped and I said, oh, that is so profound. And it turned out that in my interviews, that was one of the things that people wanted. They wanted that acknowledgement. They wanted people to say something like, oh my gosh, that's terrible that happened to you. It should have never happened. I'm so sorry. So that's a big one. Inclusion, of course, it's like all the diversity and inclusion programs, they all say people want to feel a sense of belonging and they want, not to be marginalized and so on. So inclusion's a big one. Safety, another big one. People want to feel safe,
right.
Not just physically safe, but, free from humiliation too, a psychological safety. Fairness, well, this is, of course, fairness. People want to be treated fairly. They want autonomy. They want to feel that they're independent, they can work independently, and nobody's going to micromanage them. In understanding, this is a big one because people hate to be judged, especially judged when the person who's doing the judging doesn't have any clue about what was going on with the person. So wanting a deeper understanding of what their lives were like was very important to people. Benefit of the doubt. People want to be treated as trustworthy, and it was uniquely universal, this one. And finally, people want an apology if something bad happens to them. People want the person to take responsibility for the harm. So, and interestingly, Heather, I presented these 10 elements of dignity when I went into the corporate world for the first time. And I said to them, okay, people, I said, tell me which of these 10 elements is violated the most in your workplace. And Heather, no matter where I was, no matter which corporate environment I was in, one came up time after time after time. 80% of the time, the people chose this one element. I'm curious, would you like to guess which one it is?
Okay. Challenge accepted. All right. So let me think. All right. So we've got identity, recognition, acknowledgement of suffering, inclusion, safety. There's so many options. I almost want to say safety.
Oh my gosh, you're the only person in the world who's got that right the first time.
Okay, cool.
Bravo. Now here's the thing. So I pursued it. I said, safety? What do you mean safety? And they're not talking physical safety. They said to me, 80% of the respondents said to me, that they don't feel safe to speak up when something bad happens at work, when their supervisor treats them badly, humiliates them. They don't feel safe because they're afraid they won't get the good performance review. They're even afraid they'll lose their jobs.
Right.
This one person said to me, Donna, are you kidding me? Speak up to my boss? That's like career suicide. So, I just thought I'm amazed that you got that one first. And tell me
why
drove you to choose safety first. Yes.
Well, organizational psychology is my area, and and one thing that seems to be coming up again and again and again, especially as of late, is authenticity. People want to be in an environment where they feel like they can bring their real and authentic selves to work.
Yes.
However, how many people can honestly say that they can bring their real and authentic selves to work? I actually had a conversation with an executive recently about this. And I asked this individual, this individual had been working at their company for maybe 15 years. So it's not like, and as an executive, it's not like they had to worry about job security. They were that person who, from my perspective, if anyone could be authentic and open and out there, it would be this person.
Yes.
And they said to me, no, of course not. Of course I can't bring my authentic self, and you can't either. And we had a very real, raw conversation about that. And I'm inclined to agree, but only because of just some of the experiences that I've had, but also the conversations that I've had with individuals about what it really means to be authentic. Because honestly, we have rules and policies and procedures that we put into place to dictate appropriate behavior and inappropriate behavior. And if your behavior falls outside the norm at any point in time, you may get a pass once, you may get a pass twice, but if you do that too many times, you may need to find yourself another environment to work in. So I've been contemplating this whole concept of authenticity for a while. And is it something that we can really expect organizations to offer? And is it something that we can really encourage staff and employees to be courageous enough to try? And I've been wondering, is it just about fit or person organization fit where, if you find the right company, the right culture, then yes, you can be your authentic self. And maybe the issue is that people just haven't found that yet. But I don't know. I've been contemplating that for a little while now.
Well, I think there are boundaries, this is, any psychologist will tell you, and yourself, that there are certain boundaries that we have to exist in. We can be our authentic self. And so, for example, one of the boundaries would be, from a dignity perspective, yeah, you can be your authentic self, but, don't cross that line where you're really harming other people,
Right.
where you're violating their dignity there's nothing, we all have to do that. We all live within the norms of society. But this one, I think articulating dignity as one of those boundaries, not crossing over to violating and hurting people. So I think, I think it's interesting that you connect it with authenticity, because I hear that all the time too. I want to be my authentic self here. And so, and then exploring what that's like and what the limits of that are. Even for your own good, right? What the limits are of that. So, fascinating. That's really fascinating, Heather.
So I took a look at your website before this call, and I noticed there's a comment on there that most people don't really understand what dignity is. And I said, really? What do you mean? And I have to ask about that. So in your experience, what do you mean by that? It seems intuitive that, of course, we know what dignity means. What have you seen in your experience working with other people?
Well, as you know, I took a deep dive into this and ended up deciding that I didn't want to be all Harvard analytical about coming up with a definition of dignity. I wanted to come up with an idea about dignity that anybody could relate to, no matter what age, what country. I wanted it to be a human issue. And so I came up with a very simple definition, which is that dignity is our inherent value and our inherent vulnerability at the same time. So value meaning that we're all worthy. Every single one of us is born with dignity. And we all should be treated as if we're something of value, because our dignity is just as vulnerable as our physical selves are. Our physical beings, we have laws to protect against any physical harm that we may endure, But nobody really thinks about how vulnerable our dignity is and how we can question it. We can have self-doubt around whether we're worthy, and that we are vulnerable to harm, to being hurt with that dignity. I mean, I found some research that showed that, some neuroscience research that showed that when people experience a violation to their dignity, that it shows up in their brains in the same place as a physical injury. So the brain basically doesn't know the difference between a wound to your dignity, being humiliated, being, violated, and having a physical wound. So this stuff is really, really important. And I can tell you, even though my definition is simple, we're all born worthy, we're all born inherently valuable. When I say to people, what do you think dignity is? Well, they say, well, isn't it respect? Isn't it just respect? I say, no, it's not respect. I said, respect in my mind is something that has to be earned. Whereas dignity, we're all born with it. We don't have to, it's going to be there no matter what happens. Even if we get our dignity assaulted, it's still with us. And so introducing these ideas to groups, and I would say, I'd go into an organization, I'd say, look, how many of you have really clear about having accepted your own dignity? And people look at me like, well, I never really gave that a thought.
Right.
They'll say, dignity? Well, no, I never really explored that. Or, yeah, I mean, it's just a word that I know, but in terms of what it means for me and my life and my relationships and, and the conflicts that I get in, they just don't understand it. And so the gaps are huge. You say, you ask me what's missing there. The gaps are huge. And I one of my Ecuadorian colleagues says to me, Donna, the ignorance around dignity is just encyclopedic. And he said, it's just, now that I've read your book and I understood it. And this is something that he said, everybody needs to learn this, starting in grammar school.
Right.
And all the way into college. We need to have this part of our educational system so that people understand. Number one, because so many people, Heather, haven't even accepted their own dignity. Archbishop Tutu, the other big learning I got from him was when he said, Donna, I said, he asked me how I got involved with dignity. And I said, well, the parties in conflict that I've worked in have told me that they felt that they've had their dignity stripped from them. And Archbishop Tutu reacted in such a strong way. He said, what are you talking about? He said, nobody can strip us of our dignity. It's always there with us. And he said to me, how do you think we got through apartheid in South Africa? We knew the only thing that we had in our control was our dignity, and we weren't willing to give that up for anything. So just even knowing that, that simple truth about our shared humanity, that we all have it, and at the same time, we're vulnerable to having it injured. And we have to take care of our dignity wounds just as we would, if we fell down, broke our arm, went into the hospital, got a nice cast put on or something. We have to care for our dignity wounds just as much as we have to care for our physical injuries. So the gaps are closing because lots of people now it's in many schools. I've had the great pleasure of working with people from the West Coast to the East Coast and in between, and integrating this into dignity education into the school systems. So it's good. It's going to take some time, Heather. But the workplace where we spend so much time, this is where the education, I think, really needs to begin, because people are suffering. People are, better than I do. I mean, you're an organizational psychologist. How people often say they dread coming into work. Well, why? And it's because they don't like being mistreated when they're there, and they feel like they have no recourse to speak up when something bad happens like that.
Yeah. So one thing that I know personally, it's so important to me when I'm at work, when I go in to help an organization, that I'm creating space for people and communicating that, yes, you have value and I want to hear what you have to say. I want to meet you where you're at. It's important to me that I'm not causing harm when I work with an organization and with people in an organization. And I know that our listeners have the same heart and the same spirit, and they're very much interested in knowing what they can do to ensure that they are not causing harm and that they're actually creating a really good supportive environment at work. So I'm wondering, one thing that you have also done is you've spent a lot of time focusing on dignity and conflict resolution. Uh, what can we do to ensure that we're fighting fair at work?
hmm Well, I mean, it's really important that, to understand that treating people with dignity doesn't mean just being nice and, or kind. I mean, kindness is definitely a part, and being nice is definitely a part of treating each other with dignity, especially at the workplace. But it also means that if something doesn't feel right to us, that we have the skills to speak up and say to someone, especially when it's feeling harmful, right? You were just telling me that you don't want to do any harm. At the same time, helping people walk through that process of, all right, how do I defend my dignity when somebody treats me badly at work? What do I say to them? How do I navigate that space? And I'll tell you, people, one of the other things that I came up with in my research is that we have built into us a lot of self-preservation instincts. And one of the self-preservation instincts that run rampant in the workplace is this idea that we don't like standing up for ourselves. We avoid conflict. People don't like conflict.
Right.
And so one of the things that I do when I go into an organization is help people to develop the words, the vocabulary, how you react. And let me just give you one really simple example of that, Heather. So if somebody says something that's very harmful and hurtful, no matter whether it's your boss or your colleague, one of the things that we found when working in the corporate world, one of the things that we found is very effective is if you go up to the person who's harmed you and say, look, my relationship with you at work here is really important to me. I want to have a good, strong working relationship. Something that you said in that staff meeting yesterday is still sitting with me, and I'm not comfortable with what happened, how I felt after hearing you say what you said. Because my relationship with you was so important, I feel like I want to tell you, because I have a feeling you're not even aware of the impact that it had on me. And so let me just pause on that for a second, Heather, because when you say to somebody, I want to give you some information because my relationship with you is important to me. I want to have a good, strong, healthy relationship. That already is disarming.
Right.
It's disarming. And so people who are sort of normal, decent, everyday good people will say, oh my gosh, what did I do? I'm so sorry. Tell me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me. And I would say, a good maybe 85, 90% people, when you present it in this disarming way, will say, oh, of course I didn't mean to harm you. Thank you so much for giving me that feedback because, I certainly don't want to be a dignity violator.
Right.
And so that 10%, Heather, you and I know, all of us who work in the organizational development and psychology know that there are narcissists out there in the world, mm-hmm. and that small percentage of people who can't take feedback, who just hear it only as criticism, not as loving, gee, you've got a blind spot. Let me help illuminate that blind spot because I know you don't want to be harming people. So, we have to decide as the person who's going to be approaching the dignity violator, am I dealing with the 90% of people who will say, oh, yes, please tell me? Or do I have this other, small percentage of people who will not take criticism no matter what, or take feedback because they experience it as criticism? So, but this is the kind of thing, Heather, that we need to learn how to do in order to, to what you call fight fair. And it's not even so much fighting as it is confronting. I would use that word instead of fighting. Mm-hmm. How do we confront people who have blind spots. I mean, see, because we want to give people the benefit of the doubt. That's one of the elements of dignity. We want to say, look, you may not even be aware of it. But I have to tell you, because I care about our relationship, this is how it felt to be on the receiving end of that. And I don't know, it's just in and of itself, people find that even saying that is hard. So we have to get over our already this self-preservation instinct to avoid even confronting people in the most skilled way. So I tell people, look, we have to work at this. This is something that we need to practice. Start with somebody who you feel 100% safe with and give them feedback, and then move to the more difficult people. But it's really effective. It's very, very effective, Heather, once people feel comfortable using the words and using the language.
I'm really glad that you shared that. It reminds me of a conversation that I saw between Oprah and Ayanna Van Zant about confrontations. And they basically reframed the whole how you think about a confrontation. So they mentioned, I don't like to call it a confrontation. I call it a carefrontation, because I care about this relationship and I care about you and what we have so much. And if I don't bring this up, it's actually going to harm the relationship. It's going to harm what we have. So if you're able to reframe it in your mind and approach it in that way, of course you have to say something. You're compelled to say something, because if you don't, you might not have a working relationship after that. And if you actually care, then yeah, you're going to do something. And so I know for me, it helped me think about the word confrontation in a different way, in a different light.
Carefrontation. That's wonderful.
Right. It's so warm and fuzzy.
Well, so, of course, the underlying, again, the reason why that is difficult is because we've got this festering anger from having been treated badly. So the other thing that we really need to do before we even move toward carefronting someone is to take care of that anger, right? Take care of that reaction, because you deserve to have that reaction. It's appropriate for somebody to get upset when they're treated badly. There's nothing wrong with it. The problem is you don't want to react from that space. You want to be able to, sit and talk with somebody, get some acknowledgement from, your loved ones or something. Oh my gosh, you shouldn't have been treated that way. Once that old brain has calmed down, then you can move into saying, look, my relationship is important with you, is important to me. I really care about how we work together here, whatever those great words are. But I also want to share something with you that is really true for me. And that is that I always tell people when I work with them that I myself am a recovering dignity violator. I know what it's like. I know, I that's a joke, but it's true. I know what it's like to unknowingly, violate somebody's dignity. You just ask my husband, he'll tell you, yeah, she's a dignity violator, or you ask my sister. But the fact is, this is part of the ignorance that was unfolded in me when I started learning this. Sometimes I felt righteously justified in, returning the harm to people. But once I learned about how easy it is to slip into that mode of righteous anger, we can slip into that so fast, but it's a slippery slope, because that takes us spiraling down. It doesn't give us that higher ground that we need. We need higher ground here when we're trying to get out of these messes with people. So at one time I told an audience, yes, I'm a recovering dignity violator, and I have a organization here in Boston called Dignity Violators Anonymous, and you're all welcome. But it's, I think it's really important, even though I make light of it, and I do use humor all the time in my work, Heather, by the way, and levity.
Oh, good.
I think it's important to recognize that, we're all in the same trap together. All humans have these self-preservation instincts. We can lash back when somebody, it's our first, even unconscious, involuntary response is to want to get even with people when they harm us. So this is just a human issue that we're all facing. And I just don't want us to feel like there's all those bad people out there, right? Oh, and we're the good people. But it's not true. We're all vulnerable to, number one, having our dignity violated, but we're also vulnerable to violating it and others unless we educate ourselves. So this is, I think we have to develop a big dose of compassion for ourselves, because this is hard work, Heather. In fact, I think the dignity work and dignity is a spiritual practice, frankly, because we are confronted with it every single day. We have a choice. How am I going to treat this person? Am I going to treat her as if she matters, or am I going to exclude her? Am I going to, think that she is less than that I'm inferior, she's inferior to me, or he's, I'm superior to them? All these things we have to make conscious in our minds that, yes, we do want to make a choice to honor people's dignity on a daily basis. And I consider it my spiritual practice because it's not easy. And so that big dose of compassion that we need to help each other, we need each other to get through this. We can't do this alone. We need each other.
That's so true. That's so true. I really love the idea of making it a spiritual practice, because most people don't think about it that way, but it makes perfect sense when you explain it like that. Donna, I want to thank you for coming onto the show today, sharing your experiences working in this space, giving us some tools and tips that we can try and practice and live out going forward. And for those of you who are listening, if you're interested in learning more about dignity, about the 10 elements, about Donna's work, if you want to connect with her, you can get links to all of that in our show notes. So Donna, is there anything else that you want to touch on before we go today?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, of course, you and I could probably talk about this for the rest of the day, right. But I think most importantly, and, I made a promise to Archbishop Tutu that I would never, ever again say that people can have their dignity stripped. I think one of the most important things for all of us, and to leave and to close with this notion, is to recognize our own inherent value and worth. Because if we don't lovingly embrace our own dignity, it's harder to do it with others. So I say we got to start right at home first with our own dignity. And we're not only valuable and worthy, but we are invaluable. We're priceless and we're irreplaceable. So I think I just want to leave our listeners with that thought and just celebrate that.
So good. So good. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Lead with Levity podcast. Go to www.leadwithlevity.com to access show notes and other resources.